Welcome. We constantly get requests saying, tell us about Abraham, the man who literally changed the course of history. Who was he really? Well, today we are going to dive into a fascinating explainer on his chronological biography, pulling straight from the ancient texts. We're going to strip away all the centuries of commentary and look exactly at what the primary sources say about this ancient nomad who shaped the modern world.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. We're going to trace his path starting from his initial call and journey, his covenant and that famous name change, his bold plea for Sodom, the miraculous birth of Isaac, the ultimate test of faith, and finally, his end and lasting legacy. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. Abram's Call and Journey. So the narrative actually kicks off with his family leaving the ancient city of Ur under his father, Terah, but the story truly shifts into high gear when Abram receives a monumental call from God to leave literally everything behind. At 75 years old, he packs up and departs Haran with his wife Sarai and nephew Lot heading toward Canaan. But almost immediately, they hit a massive roadblock. A severe famine forces them to take a temporary detour down to Egypt. It's a recurring theme in his life. A massive, cosmic promise followed immediately by a huge real-world challenge. Now, think about the sheer scale of this promise. God is saying this to a 75-year-old nomad whose wife, Sarai, is famously barren. They own absolutely no land and are just traveling through foreign territories. Yet the text presents this incredible, almost unbelievable promise. He's going to father a great nation and be a blessing to the whole world. The contrast between his physical reality and this divine promise is just staggering.
Moving on to part 2, covenant and new name.
The tension in the narrative really builds because decades pass and there's still no biological heir. 24 years after he first left Haran, at the astonishing age of 99, a major physical and spiritual shift happens. He's settled in the land, he's even rescued his nephew Lot in battle, but that core promise still totally unfulfilled. Then, at 99, God appears again to dramatically renew this covenant.
And this brilliantly illustrates a total identity transformation. His name is changed from Abram, which means exalted father, to Abraham, meaning father of many nations. Sarai becomes Sarah. And to mark this permanent, multi-generational promise, the covenant of circumcision is established for Abraham and his household. It's a permanent, physical sign of an unbreakable deal.
To visually cement this impossible promise in Abraham's mind, the source material repeatedly uses this gorgeous, poetic imagery. Look up at the sky and count the stars. So shall your offspring be. The text even describes this intense, mystical covenant ceremony in Genesis 15, with a smoking firepot and a blazing torch passing between animal sacrifices, while Abraham is in a deep sleep. It makes it crystal clear. The burden of fulfilling this promise rests entirely on God. Part 3. Abraham's Plea for Sodom. Shortly after this, we get a fascinating character moment. Abraham finds out the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, where his nephew Lot lives, are going to be destroyed because of their wickedness. And here, Abraham completely shifts gears. He goes from being a passive receiver of promises to this active, bold negotiator. He actually challenges God, asking, will the judge of all the earth not do right? The text details this incredibly tense negotiation where Abraham boldly bargains down from 50 righteous people all the way down to just 10. And God agrees every single time. It really shows Abraham stepping up, totally unafraid to plead for justice and mercy. Which brings us to part 4, the birth of the promised son, Isaac. Despite the destruction of Sodom and the passage of even more time, the biological impossibility of the covenant is finally resolved. Exactly 25 years after that initial promise in Haran, Abraham is exactly 100 years old and Sarah is 90 when his designated heir Isaac is finally born. The text really emphasizes the timeline here to highlight just how miraculous this event is. A year earlier, when she was told she'd have a child, Sarah literally laughed in disbelief inside her tent. But now, she's laughing in pure joy. As she says, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. That's actually where Isaac gets his name. It literally translates to he laughs. A lifetime of waiting was completely transformed into joy. However, the narrative notes that this joy causes some immediate family conflict. Sarah demands that Hagar and her son Ishmael be sent away so Isaac's inheritance is secure. It's a deeply painful moment for Abraham, but the text emphasizes that God distinctly promises to protect Ishmael too. Hagar and Ishmael are sent into the wilderness of Beersheba, where God provides water and promises to make Ishmael a great nation with 12 rulers. Meanwhile, Abraham is gaining serious political footing in Canaan, even making a formal peace treaty over water wells with King Abimelech. He's really becoming an established leader. Part 5. Abraham's Test of Faith. All right, this brings us to the narrative climax of the explainer, and arguably the most intense passage in the entire source material. Abraham is commanded to go to Mount Moriah and sacrifice his beloved, long-awaited son, Isaac. It's psychologically devastating. The text outlines this agonizing, suspenseful 3-day journey. Abraham makes Isaac carry the wood for his own sacrifice. Then Isaac looks around and asks that heart-wrenching question, "Where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham just replies that God himself will provide it. He builds the altar, binds the son he waited a century for, and raises the knife.
And right at the last possible second, an angel calls out from heaven and stops him. Abraham looks up and finds a ram caught by its horns in a nearby thicket, which he sacrifices instead. He then names the place Jehovah-Jireh, meaning the Lord will provide. Because he didn't hold back his only son, God makes a final, permanent oath to bless him forever. It's an absolutely stunning resolution to the ultimate test.
Part 6. Abraham's End and Legacy.
Following that massive test, the final chapters of his biography focus entirely on securing his family's future and laying down permanent roots. Sarah passes away at 127. To bury her, Abraham formally purchases the cave of Machpelah from Ephron the Hittite for 400 silver shekels. This is a huge milestone because it's his very first legal land ownership in the Promised Land. Knowing his time is short, he also meticulously arranges a marriage for Isaac, sending his servant back to his homeland, which wonderfully results in finding Rebekah. Finally, he leaves his entire inheritance to Isaac.
Looking at the final data points recorded in the text, we see some incredible lifespans. Sarah lives to 127. Ishmael lives to 137, fathering 12 tribal rulers. But Abraham outlives them all, reaching the remarkable age of 175. When he finally breathes his last, he's buried in that same cave of Machpelah. And there's a really poignant detail here. His 2 estranged sons, Isaac and Ishmael, actually come together to bury him peacefully.